Hey everyone, Alex here from Alex Drifts. So I saw a thread on Reddit asking about swapping an engine on a vehicle, and it occurred to me that I haven't really personally seen too many videos on explaining what is required to do an engine swap. And today I'm going to show you some basic steps to go over before you even think about doing that to any vehicle or project car that you have. And break down and make sure that once you've gone through all these steps, you'll know whether it's a good idea to do it or not. And I will spoil the whole video. It's most likely not a good idea. So you want to swap your engine. Maybe you got a free car, maybe a buddy of yours told you they have a 300ZX or a 325i sitting in their backyard with no engine and they've given it to you for free. Now, a lot of people say that, well, it's free, Alex, so anything I do to it's going to be basically a profit. Not always the case. So let's go over the first step and then we'll go through all of them and I'll explain to you why it's not always the best idea, even if you have a free vehicle, to actually swap the engine. First thing you got to think about is what are your intentions with this project car or vehicle or your personal vehicle. Is it a race car? Are you going to be competitively racing this vehicle for time attack, track? Is it a drag car? Is it a drift car? Is this a car you just want to show off at a car meet? There are a lot of different intentions for a quote-unquote project car, and you have to know what is your end goal with this vehicle no matter what. And the reason why that's so important, if all you want is just power, what do you want the power for? Like, you're telling me, well, I want to have a 500 horsepower car. What are you going to do with 500 horsepower? Are you going to use the 500 horsepower? Are you going to be drag racing? Are you going to be doing roll racing? What are you doing with the vehicle? Because if your only goal is to have 500 horsepower, that's actually going to cause some problems later on, because once the car is technically done, you may find out that all the money you spent towards one part was a waste of time because you needed to buy something else, such as a great drift car is not a good drag car. In fact, a drift car is a terrible drag car. But a good race car can be a good drift car. And a good race car is not a good show car. Almost every professional race car, most of them, do not look that good. They're not a car you really want to look at. Almost every race car I've built in my life has not been a show car. And most likely if they are a show car, they're not a very good race car. Now, there are exceptions to the rule, but for the most part, your budget's not infinite. So that's usually the limiting factor to be good at all of those, is basically have a budget that is infinite. So I'm assuming whoever's watching this video is not a billionaire. Because if you are a billionaire, then money buys anything. And if you give me enough money, I'll make you whatever you want. But I'm going to assume the person watching this video is not that. Step 2, budget. This is very important. You have to know how much your budget's going to be. A lot of people will say, well, I'm only going to be making it over the course of 5 or 10 years. That is not realistic. You should never tell yourself, well, I'm going to do it over 5 or 10 years. It's very different, unless you own your property, unless you have a dedicated space that's just dedicated to project cars. It's not a good idea to tell yourself, well, I don't have to worry too much about the budget because I have 5 to 10 years to build it. And that's only going to work for someone who owns their own property, who has financial stability. There's a lot of things that could happen and change that situation. So never go into a project thinking that, well, I'm going to do it over the course of many years. Because that's also a problem in itself, because it's going to cause you to actually get lethargic because you're not getting any immediate rewards. So your goal with a project car or swap should always be to get it done as quickly as possible. And you won't really understand that whole mentality until you've actually gone down that road, like I have in the past and other people have. You have to know how much money do you want to spend. How much is a realistic number? And what I would tell you before even starting the project, have the money ready to go. And there is an old saying you may have or have not heard, which is whatever your goal is, whatever your budget is, just times 2. So if your budget is 30 grand, plan for 60. If your budget is 60 grand, plan for 120. Next step, number 3, and this is very important. skills and tools required to do the swap. So have you done this before? Do you have the tools? Do you need to hire someone to help you? Do you need to rent tools? Are you, again, going back to that whole mentality where you're going to build it up over a slow amount of time? And that's going to go back to step 2, which is budget. So are you also going to have to include how much tools you have to buy or rent and spend? So that's a big thing. So a great example of this is doing an SR swap on a 240SX. If you're a basic mechanic, it is definitely doable for someone who's not a full-fledged mechanic. In fact, I did my first SR swap when I was 16. So it is definitely doable. It doesn't work right because you'll find out you have to learn a lot of things, but it's definitely an easy swap, because the reason why that swap is pretty easy to do is that car was designed to have that engine. So it's not that big of a stretch to put an engine that was already designed for the car. However, to do it properly, you need everything, and that's another thing I'll get to later on. But that is a very important thing. So if you've never done a project car, and this is a big thing I get with on phones, this is the biggest phone call I get, and if you're watching this video because I told you to watch it, this is why I wanted you to watch it. Just because the engine fits in the car doesn't constitute how long it takes to do. And a big problem I have is people will call me and say, hey, I want to do an LS3 swap on my 240SX. That's one example. There's a lot of calls I get. And yes, putting the engine in the engine bay literally takes 3 hours. And there's a very popular video that MotorTrend's now gotten rid of that I did the E-Rod LS3 swap for MotorTrend, the 240SS. I've re-uploaded that to my other channel if you want to watch it. And the process of me getting the engine out of the crate and then getting the engine in the car, that was actually 3 to 4 hours. And the engine was in the car ready to go. Not including the time that it took to massage the transmission tunnel to fit the T56 Magnum. But that is not hard in itself at all. That is the easiest part about the entire job. All these small things add up, like doing the gas pedal for the E-Rod LS3, it's electronic. The factory 240SX is a cable driven. You can't run the cable driven for it to be E-Rod. You have to run the electronic pedal. So just making that bracket, because as of right now, there is no readily available bracket. So making one up, that's another couple hours. All this stuff adds up. So when people call me and say, hey, I want to swap this into this, they all see, well, the engine only takes a couple hours to put in. Why are you charging me $10,000 labor to do this? And that's actually on the low end. I prefer not to do engine swaps nowadays because it's not a very profitable business. I would much rather do basic maintenance than that. But I still do it because people are still willing to pay me to do it because of the jobs I do. But it's a way bigger job and it requires much more experience. I've been doing this for over 20 years. So I've got 20 years of experience that covers the skills, and I also have probably $500,000 in tools. So we're literally tooled to do engine swaps. So keep that in mind when doing that. Number 4. Now this is a mistake I personally made. This is actually something I regret doing, and it's actually the reason why I haven't been able to compete professionally for many years now. Has it been done before, and is it documented well? Now, the SR20 swap, it has been done a billion times. There's a million threads on it, so much information on it. The LS1 swap on a 240SX, been done a million times. There's tons of freaking information on it. What I did on my personal 240SX, because it was basically free for me, in my mind it was anyways, was the 1UZ-FE swap, which is the Lexus LS400 engine. At the time when I started it, there was some information. However, almost every single person who has done this swap has been bare bones built. But that's a great example. If it hasn't been documented before, or you don't know someone who's done it, and you don't have readily available parts, like a swap kit, and a lot of mistakes people make is, yes, for the 1UZ there's a engine mount transmission kit and drive shaft and all other stuff, but there's not much electronic swap stuff out there. There's not much high horsepower 1UZ-FE out there, so there's a lot of problems with that. So before you go into a swap, make sure there's plenty of information and plenty of resources available for you, such as the SR20 swap or the RB swap for Nissan 240SX, or the swaps that are available for BMWs. So, I mean, there's a lot of LSX swaps on those. The next step, step number 5, Is it necessary? Here's a great example. I own a 2020 Mustang S550 GT, and I've seen people do an LS swap on the car. That in itself is just more of a middle finger for people, which honestly, I'm not a four-door Chevy person. I'm just a guy who likes fast cars. Simple as that. So is it necessary? So if your goal from before was, I want a 1,000 horsepower car, you don't need an LSX to make 1,000 horsepower. You can just put a supercharger or turbos, which I've done to mine, and I made 1,000 horsepower. So a great example is it necessary? So again, going back to the first step, if your goal is to have a drag car make 600 horsepower or a drag car with unlimited horsepower, this is another issue, is technically you don't need to do an engine swap for that. Because to make a super high horsepower engine, it doesn't matter what engine you start out with, whether it's a big block Chevy or a 2JZ GTE or an RB26 or an RB30 for that matter. All those engines, there's very little used from the original block. So if you were to bring your Supra to me and you said, well, I want to try to be one of the world's fastest and try to keep up with the Florida guys, what's left over from the original engine to make over 2,000 horsepower, it's almost nothing. I maybe a couple brackets at most, maybe a couple bolts. There's almost zero left over when you're making super high horsepower. So if you start out with a 325i BMW, literally there's no point to swap the engine because you're going to be basically making a brand new engine anyways. So if you are going to swap it, you're basically starting out from zero. Plus that goes back to the budget issue where, if you're trying to make 2,000 horsepower, your budget, you really can't have a budget. You just have to basically pay whatever you pay. So is it necessary? So if your goal is a show car, a lot of the times show cars aren't even fast. Most show cars I know are like 400 horsepower. So maybe you just pull all the parts off of the engine, get them polished, make it look pretty. Because that's really what a show car is. It's just a car that looks pretty. I know plenty of guys who won car meets or car shows, and they're the slowest car there, but it looks nice. Because all that matters when you win a show car is how nice the car looks. It's not necessarily how much power the car makes. If it's a race car, again, depending on what series, some series don't even let you swap the engine. And if it's a drift car, that's probably the only situation where you truly are going to swap the engine. But at that time, a lot of this is moot because no matter what car you start out with, you're going to have to rebuild the whole car if you want to be competitive. So again, depending on what your goal is, you got to ask yourself, do I actually need to do this, or am I doing this just to be special? And that's what it comes down to for a lot of people, is they just want to put, well, I want to put an LSX in my Mustang because I want to piss people off, or I'm going to put an RB26 in my Corvette. Is that even necessary? You already started out with the LS engine. Like imagine buying a C7 Corvette, a Z07, and then pulling that engine out and putting an RB26 inside of it. I get it, you want to do it because you want to be unique, but there's no situation here that's going to basically truly be superior. Unless you're talking about just show car, which is, but I mean, that again, that is doing something that basically breaks almost every rule. Has it been done before? I don't even know if someone's done that before. Budget that you can't even have a budget for that sort of swap, because whoever's going to do it, I could do something like that, but I would have to tell you point blank to your face, that's $100,000 base price. It's not going to be below $100,000. It's going to be way above that, because I'm going to have to invent a bunch of stuff. And this has happened in my shop multiple times. I've had to invent things to solve problems. And you have no idea how much R&D goes into inventing something as simple as a silencer, which some of you who know l-spec know I'm the only person who's ever made one. So that's another big thing. So going over everything, the very, very last one, which is the true heart of the matter. Cost versus benefit. And this is the thread that was started on Reddit. He got a free 300ZX non-turbo, and he wanted to do a TT swap or an LS3 swap. Now, this is another thing, I'm going to lead into a big story about this, and this is something that kind of depresses me thinking about this, is the heyday of Japanese JDM swaps is kind of past us now. My generation and the older generation have used up most of that stuff, or it's just gotten so old and it's set for so long that the wreckers have had to actually melt it down for scrap metal. You cannot readily get every JDM engine now. We're running short on supply. We only had a finite amount of engines ever made for these cars. And also, because the 300ZX is not a very popular car anymore, not many people even bother keeping that stuff. So a normal 300ZX twin turbo engine makes about 300 horsepower. And to do the swap properly, even though yes, that car came with it, the problem is there's almost very little in similarities between non-turbo and turbo. The majority of the differences are all the auxiliary products, like the intercooler, the intakes, the turbo location, the transmission slightly different. There's a lot of differences, right? So the way we used to do it is we used to buy front cuts of like rear-ended 300ZX twin turbos and just put everything over. I don't even know where to get front cuts at this point. I don't even know if there is still available for that. So, and even if you could, remember, supply is very low. So when supply goes down, price goes up, because there's still a demand for it, because there's still people who own, there's still a fairly large group that likes these cars. So the demand hasn't changed in the past 15 years, but the supply has gone down. So even if you do find a front cut, which I can't right now, to answer this guy's question, I couldn't find one. It's just not doable. And then even if you were going to start from scratch and say, well, Alex, I'm going to put an aftermarket intercooler, I'm going to make 600 horsepower 300ZX, so there's very little that I'm going to use from that front cut. That's all fair and good. But then it goes back to what I'm saying, cost versus benefit. So if your goal is only to have a 300 horsepower car, you could very easily find a 350Z for at most 10 grand. We're talking like, I'm assuming really high. I've already looked. I can find one right now for, if you want an automatic, you can get one for 4 grand. You can get one for 6 grand. Between those, you know, it doesn't matter what type, you can get it for very little. There is no situation where it's going to be cheaper to swap anything into that 300ZX than just going and buying an already 300 horsepower 350Z, which is superior in every way. The 300ZX is a terrible track car, terrible drift car, because it has multi-link suspension and the steering angle is almost nothing. If you check the channel, I'm one of the only people to compete at a professional level with the 300ZX non-turbo. And if you watch those videos from back in like 03, I think, they uploaded in 06, but that was back in 2003. Everyone said you're an idiot, just go get an S13. And it took me a year before that engine let go for me to buy an S13, and immediately I'm placing in the top 3. I was struggling to even qualify with that car, and as soon as I got the S13, I'm immediately qualifying. So that's the other thing. And also not on top of that, you're not going to win any points. No one cares, honestly. The group that's going to care is so small. Even if you're only going for the admiration of other 300ZX owners, it's not even a swap that's that hard to do. It's just at this point, it's hard to do via resources, not even skills. Doing the swap on my 240SX, I honestly feel the 1UZ was a poor choice. I should have went the LSX because of the number 4. There's not a lot of parts available, and I don't have a lot of time on my hands to make these parts. So my car's been on constant hold for 7 years now. And, you know, it's a mistake on my hand. I'm already past the point of no return, so I might as well just finish it off. But if I would have just done an LSX swap and then put a turbo on it, there's a million swaps available in parts. So it would have been done within 6 months. My budget probably would end up being the same too. Most of the time, almost every single time, if you call me and ask me, hey, I wanted to swap my EcoBoost Mustang to a GT, yes, it came with the car, but it's very little is reused when you swap them back and forth. The only thing that's similar is the subframe and the car itself. Everything's different. The transmission's different, the radiator's different, the intercooler, obviously there's an intercooler in there now. So there's very little I'm going to use from your car. So once you start factoring in buying the engine, the intercoolers, the wires, the harness, the ECU, and then reprogramming everything, tuning it, and then you can go buy a slightly used GT for $35. It's going to cost more than $35 to pay someone to do that swap. And even if you did it yourself, you get rid of the labor fee, and maybe it is cheaper in the parts wise to do that, but your time's worth something. Unless you have income coming from you not having to do anything, like maybe you have a company that just generates income without you having to do a single thing, that makes sense, because then your time wasn't going to be wasted doing anything else if you don't have a family or anything else like that. But almost everyone has something else they should be doing. Very few people have time where, oh, I was just going to sleep for 40 hours this week. If that was the case, then obviously using your man hours towards a swap, it's fine. But your time is worth something. So even if it's going to cost you almost nothing in parts, you've always got to factor in your time. And that's what happened with me. The 1UZ has been sitting, the 1UZ swap has been sitting for years, because unfortunately for me to generate income so I can have a house and drive and do things, I have to work. Before you've even thought about doing an engine swap, remember, most of the time, it's just cheaper. Just go buy the car. Just go buy a different car. You're going to enjoy it. Like if I was going to take this project on, it's going to take me, assuming all the parts are here, it's going to take me 3 weeks to a month. Okay, because the way a shop works. Otherwise, versus you just going on Craigslist right now and going to pick up a 350Z and drive it home. Done. It's half a day for you. And you paid less money too, so now you get to enjoy the car. You can go straight to the track the next day. Done. You have a car. You're having fun. Versus the car sitting here doing nothing for 3 to 4 weeks, and then what if one of the parts, which will most likely happen, we can't get for 6 months, now you have no car for 6 months. Don't swap your car unless there's a reason why you have to. You have to do it for a drag car. You have to do it for a race car. You don't even have to do it for a show car. You know, if you have to do it, then of course go for it. But if you don't have to do it, don't do it. It's never going to work out in your positive. There's never anyone who's come out of a swap and said, well, I should have always done this. Almost everyone I've spoken to, whether they're professionals or non-professionals, always either sell it immediately and buy the car that they should have bought, or they just don't even use it anymore because they never truly finished it because it doesn't work correctly. Getting a car running and getting a car running correctly are two vastly different jobs. Just for me to start an engine, I'm sure you can go find a video right now of a guy starting a V8 on the ground. If you just want your engine started, that's like 10 minutes. It just needs power, gas, bam, fire it up. You want to drive it down the road and go for a road trip to Las Vegas? You're going to have a lot of things working to make sure that does so you don't die, right? That's all I want to say. I'm sorry the video went a little long. Thank you for watching. Please subscribe. I will be uploading more, assuming I get more interest in it. I don't want to spend all this time editing and making videos to find out that no one gives a crap. But thank you for watching, and I will see you next time.